Hello, Lindsay. Thanks so much for hopping on with me. I'm excited to dive into your story and how it's led to what you're doing now. Do you care just to tell listeners just a little bit about yourself and what you're doing now?
Yeah. So, hi, Deanne. My name is Lindsay Joy Taylor, and I am the designer and maker of the Joyful Jewelry Box. So, I make handmade remembrance and memorial jewelry designed to honor the memory of your lost loved ones. I'm a mental health professional turned creative, if you will. So, I'm 33. I am married, and my background is primarily mental health, but I went back to school, got my master's degree in counseling psychology a few years ago. So I was back on the track to be a marriage and family therapist. And through sort of a series of events, I was laid off from my position. I really knew that an MFT wasn't my fit. And so really just life led me to get creative. And all of a sudden I ended up making jewelry and developed it into this mission that we'll talk about. So
Yeah, no,
yeah,
it's
and I live in California on the Central Coast in a tiny town called Napomo.
cool. I have no idea where that is, but
Yeah.
I'm sure it's
So
very.
where are you from, actually?
I'm Toronto, so Canada.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did not pick that up from your website. I
No,
apologize.
that's okay. Yeah. And nowadays, everything.
California?
Yeah. No, I know California. You said.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So smack in the middle between San Francisco and LA,
Nice.
right on the ocean. So yeah, it's really beautiful.
Very nice. Yeah. When this is kind of jumping into things, when you were a kid, did you ever imagine yourself making jewelry?
Yes and no. I grew up really creatively stunted. I sort of joke. I was one of those kids who was really fearful of putting myself into any artistic projects, and I just wouldn't even start them. You know, my best friend and actually her mom, they were very artistic, led classes, and it was kind of a joke that I couldn't express myself that way. But I wanted to be a beautician and a cosmetologist. I'd sit in front of the TV for hours and I would braid my hair and taught myself how to do all of that. And so I guess in that sense, there was a creative outlet, but I really didn't start making jewelry until high school. I kind of played around with it a little bit because my other best friend had been making it for years, played around with it a little bit in college. And sort of what I say, the serendipitous event, right before I was laid off from mental health, good old Instagram, I stumbled upon a local designer who was looking for some help. And I basically threw myself out there and said, I'm self-taught. I don't have a ton of skill, but I can help. And it led to this, really. So, yeah, and that was really in the course of only 3 years ago.
Yeah.
3 years ago. So, long-winded answer to say no.
Yeah. Never imagined it. Yeah. It's funny
where
life takes you, right? And sometimes. Yeah. So it was 3 years ago that you were originally laid off from that position that you were working?
Yes. So I worked for a mental health association and I loved the position. They were a wraparound organization, nonprofit in the community that provided housing, family, and mental health and advocacy services for those living with severe mental illness and disability in the community. And I actually really loved it. Unfortunately, just funding, politics, all that kind of stuff. So my position was just really absolved. And so mental health and counseling, it's always been such a passion of mine. And so I mean, I suppose we'll dive more into it, but it just, you take a step back and you sort of say, this all makes so much sense.
Yeah, I know.
It makes so much sense now, in the sense of the groundwork that it laid for me to be able to find a way to advocate for people that I think are strongly overlooked. And really, that's all of us. That's grief. I'm very passionate about grief and loss. And so I guess that's just a natural segue. So my story is that my mother was killed when I was 13 months old. And so my life really, I don't want to say has been dictated by that, and yet it has. I mean, how could it not, And so I don't have any physical memories of her. And growing up, I was very resilient, if you will. I was high functioning. And I really didn't demand any attention that indicated that I was struggling. You know, I was born in 1983, and that was really a big boom of the codependency and Kubler-Ross's work and the grieving process and the 5 stages of grief. And it really just took over. I mean, that's still, you know, the foundation of grief and the idea of how we process to this day. And yet children wasn't encompassed in that, you know, and at that time, there wasn't any research to support that children actually do grieve. And so I think I sort of fell in line with that. You know, from a young age, I've always been interested and compassionate about other people and mental health and psychology and just why are we the way that we are. But none of the puzzle pieces fit until a few years ago when I went back to grad school. You know, and in thinking back of my story and what I wanted to share and the message that I wanted to bring here, I was thinking about what was my biggest struggle or what was the biggest event. And it's funny, I actually kind of forgot about it. You know, it was such a huge trigger leading up to all of this. I can't believe that it wasn't the first thing that I thought of. But so, you know, I mentioned that I was very high functioning. I don't really remember learning that she died, if you will.
It's hard because
understanding that she didn't exist, or was not there, if you will. My grief wasn't minimized in my family. No way do I want to communicate that. She was killed in a very traumatic way, and so, and to this day, it remains unsolved. And so, there was so much turmoil. You know, and honestly, I was an infant. So really, I mean, my basic needs had to be met, make sure she's eating, sleeping, and all of those things. And so, in no way was it minimized. We were allowed to talk about her. We were allowed to ask questions. I don't know that we were aware to go deeper in a different way. I think that there was just so many layers to dig through before that. And so fast forward, you know, when I was in high school, knew that I wanted to go away to college. I was convinced that I would move away to the beach. And so it's interesting, the school that I ended up going to, my mom's best friend from 20 plus years ago, you know, 18 years ago, still lived in the area. And so when I moved here, my mom actually had spent all this time here, and I really didn't know that necessarily. So it was kind of returning to a piece of my history, if you will. So I studied communication studies and psychology my psychology was my minor, and worked my butt off. And then at some point, I think it was after I turned 21, I didn't experiment with alcohol and drugs, or that wasn't really anything that was my avenue. When I turned 21, though, I was out all the time. And that really started to reveal just a whole bunch of stuff, just attachment stuff, trust stuff. I didn't get in any trouble, but there's this one prominent memory. A friend of mine tapped me on the shoulder, and I flung around and smacked her because it was just so triggered. And so ultimately, all these random things led me to decide that I needed to go into therapy. It was finally time, right? You know, it was kind of like I'd gone through some minor stuff when I was young, but nothing where it was a conscious decision that I was going to go work and process the death of my mom, if you will. And so my sister, I have an older brother and an older sister, 8 and 6 years older. And so I was somewhat of an only child, you know, through high school and whatnot, but she had a really positive experience in college with therapy. And so I started there. That was the resources, you know, they have free sessions. So I signed up and I went to my first session, and I think you get an hour or whatever. And you know, the focus is short term. I think it's maybe 10 or 12 sessions or whatever. And I remember she says, "Why are you here?" And I remember sort of thinking, if I knew why I was here, I wouldn't be here. You know, I was estranged from my father at the time. We're fine now, but I think that felt like the big thing, if you will. And then as I started to tell my story, excuse me, put on my sweater here. I notice I get cold sometimes when I talk about some of that stuff, you know, some of that stuff. Yeah.
A comfort thing sometimes.
Yeah, right.
Too.
So very long story short, she didn't let me finish the session. And she referred me out and basically said, you've got some severe issues to work through here, and we can't help you in the amount of time that we have. So here's a referral. There you go. To a therapist, or not a specific referral, if a referral list to the community where they cost $100 and $150. Mind you, I'm 21 years old. I'm overwhelmed. That was really what I thought was my option. I wouldn't have I started there, right? And ultimately, I felt damaged. I felt broken. You're too damaged. I cannot help you. Well, wait a minute. Can't I just tell my story?
Yeah.
Right? And so I just, in hindsight, I didn't go back to therapy for years.
Okay.
First thing. So as I got deeper into mental health, that made me really angry. As I learned more about the risk of depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation, and just really I felt like I was so overlooked, and it just was like a confirmation of everything that I had experienced to now, except it was the other extreme. Before I wasn't ever demanding attention, so you must be fine. You don't remember, you must be fine. And then yet this was the other extreme of, oh, this is so bad, I can't help you. And so that just kind of sparked the whole thing in me, right? So I did end up getting back into therapy a few years later. It was tremendous, really it saved my life. But I was still just throwing myself into my work. Just, I would work for these companies before the Mental Health Association, but I'm very loyal and I'm a good employee. And so I would just throw myself into these positions and perform. And as things just started to click, I realized that I really wanted to go back to school. Really, really, really wanted to go back to school. So I guess sort of I apologize. Am I taking over?
No, this is your story, right? So it's
okay. I feel like this is sort of a natural segue, but I want to make sure.
Yeah, no, you got to get it all in there, right? Keep going.
So after that, that was in college. I got into therapy, continuing to throw myself sort of into work. I was at a position where I was a personal assistant to a director, and I just was so mixed up and felt like such a burden, right? It started to manifest itself in my work and in how I felt in the company. And I remember the catalyst for me ultimately, and this was this is where I need to change. Very long story short, I had a routine with my breakfast every day. I would have a piece of toast and my cup of coffee and a banana and whatever. And my boss wanted to get rid of the toaster oven because a whole thing. And I asked if we could keep it. Can we please keep the toaster oven? And it wasn't even no discussion about it. And I was so angry. In hindsight, it feels so silly, but it's so representative of how invisible I was, how much I was giving, and how much the simplest factor in what helps me function well in a day is irrelevant to you. So I was walking on my lunch break. I'm so mad. And I just the sky opened up. I mean, it sounds dorky, but I just all across my forehead, just flashing, you need to go back to school. You need to go back to school. You need to go back to school. And that ended up being a very serendipitous thing as well. I reconnected with somebody who was going to a graduate school very close by down south of here. And she thought it would be a perfect program. She'd been driving by my house for months. You need to enroll. The admissions period was right then. And basically 4 months later, I was going back to grad school.
That happened quick.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
It's called Pacifica Graduate Institute, and it's got a depth psychology focus. And I really loved that because it's not just how does the brain work, but more of it takes all of the modalities. It takes use my brain. Psychology and philosophy and law and science, and takes all of those and sort of incorporates it into how does that all manifest into who we are and how we act and the archetypes that we follow and all that. And so I would say that was the catalyst of real change.
For you or for your life? Yeah.
For me, for my life, real, true change.
Okay. How did it change you?
It kind of broke me open.
Yeah.
Literally, you know, it broke me open, like fell apart, kind of put me back together in the sense of, and it's interesting because it's not like I hadn't been through trials before. I have this ability to sort of fall apart internally. Show it very well. I have a really good game face. I will isolate and just sort of just crumble. And then I don't know if that's like that leads to you pull it back out, right? But in hindsight, you can only pull yourself to the degree that you can at that point in your life, right? Like, we're going to grow forever. We only have so much ego strength to handle whatever. I'm going to deal with this forever, right? Just in different ways, different layers and all that. And so this was the first time I intentionally really understood what happened, quite honestly. So it was how do I describe it? A long distance residential program, if you will. So I would go for a seminar type weekend once a month for 2 years. And then the third year was your practicum and your thesis.
Yeah.
And so and it was literally only an hour from my house. And, you know, I'm not an incredibly popular person or any of that. But in hindsight, I don't necessarily have trouble making friends. I'm pretty guarded. I've had the same friends for a long amount of time, but I really was scared to death to put myself out in this group. Horrified. It was triggering all my stuff about leaving home. And when I first began the program, I would actually come home. Like, you would go, so the classes would be 9 in the morning to 9 at night for 3 days. And I would drive home and get up at the crack of dawn and go back. And it just was, I was missing out on everything, honestly. And I did that for I only did the back and forth a few times, but I really withheld from the group for maybe like 6 months or so. And then there was a shift, right? There was a shift. I found me people. I started to really understand why I was there. I wasn't there to go back to school. I was there to heal. That's what I started to really figure out. Seeing clients nearly broke me. That was really, really, really intense. And that was weird because I had always seen myself as a therapist. I'd always seen myself as someone as a therapist. And so I was like, well, wait a minute, I'm not a therapist. What?
Yeah. Were you wondering how you could be a therapist if you were still broken, or was it?
I think it was leading to this, right? Like, I don't know what's going to happen in the future still, but I think it was leading to this.
Yeah.
In the sense of, certainly I was compassionate. Like, certainly I was available, but I wasn't able to create that boundary. And I wasn't taking it home, and yet I was. I can't really describe it. It was bringing up my own junk, essentially, which it does. But to the degree that I couldn't find my ground. You know, I couldn't find my grounding. Like, I didn't go home at the end of the day and think, I'm helping these people.
Yeah.
And I guess that's probably natural. Like, you know, people, you know, my friends, I'm still very in touch with people in my group, and that's part of the process. You just stick with it. Like, I mean, it's years before you know how to be a therapist. But I think it was just leading to this. And so ultimately, I think it was writing my thesis. And so my thesis, it's called The Forgotten Mourners, Traumatic Loss During Infancy. And that was when I finally realized that what I had been through was traumatic. I always knew that what I had been through was tragic.
Mm-hmm.
But I never really recognized that it was traumatic, right? And so I guess a big piece that I left out is, my personality is pretty smiley and bubbly, and
Mm-hmm.
and it is very much me, and yet it's almost not. I struggled with bitterness. I do daily still. Like, I just was so bitter
Mm-hmm.
all the time, and like I didn't understand how to be happy or really what joy was, and it kind of made me resentful, and I didn't recognize what my name really meant.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I glossed over that in the beginning. So my middle name is Joy. And, my dad basically just says that when I was born, they were having a really hard time, and that I really revived a lot for her, that I really reminded her of the joy of life and, our family. And like, I thought that was sweet, and I appreciated that, but I guess I didn't get it.
Yeah.
I didn't get it for a long time. It's almost like she knew. It's almost like, and I know her as much as I can through other people, but it's like she had to fight for joy just as much.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, like, what a gift that was my reminder, or what a gift to be given that reminder. And yet I don't know. I didn't recognize it for a long time.
Yeah.
I just didn't. And so, kind of all over the place here, but back to grad school, it was really when I started to recognize that bitterness and that joy piece, and just feeling like, how could you still haven't quite addressed the whole of it, right? Like, yes, it's tragic. Absolutely. And I'm not saying that what I went through is any more important or worse than what my loved ones have been through. That's not any way what I'm indicating. It just, I read something the other day that it was just like, ding, 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 ding. That when you lose a parent that young, you have experienced something that 99% of the population will never experience, right? Like, we'll all experience grief. We'll all experience loss. But it was like, oh, wow. No wonder I felt like there weren't that many of us, right? And I'm not trying to indicate that, you're ever alone, or that there's always somebody who can relate to what you've been through. But it just, I had overlooked the trauma piece of it so much, right? And there was, as I dove into the research, it just simply, the timing of it, regardless of all the other things that I had looked at, the timing of it was that it was very traumatic. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? My primary caretaker was just one day gone. And so it started to line all the pieces up for me. Physically, literally, it was like all the puzzle pieces in writing that thesis, and being able to see that things made sense. That there was a reason why, and there's plenty of things we'll go through that we're not going to get the reasons here. But when you can, it's really, it's really cool, and so it really just was like, oh, I'm not broken. I'm not damaged. I'm not a burden. And I knew that, and I felt that, but like, finally here, somebody believes it. Somebody is talking about it. Somebody is correcting this idea that I'm going to move through 5 stages and boom, I'm better. Or I don't hurt, or I don't miss her, or yearn, or want to know her, whatever, fill in the blanks, so, yeah. And so that thesis and that group together, being able to really build that attachment, so a big piece of that trauma that I'm talking about is attachment trauma. I actually have some really amazing relationships in my life. And it hasn't destroyed my ability to connect with others, but I deal with a lot of anxiety, a lot of social anxiety, a lot of just anxiety, and then guess I just lost my train of thought there.
That's okay. I know, because grief is very different than what you went through, to be like, for my, and I'm not an expert or, you know, or anything like that, but a grief is kind of like losing someone, but you lost someone that you never really knew in a way, right?
Exactly. You've pinpointed it. And that's strange.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so there's this perception of like, I don't want to go around, and not that I would in the first place, but I want my mom to be remembered.
Yeah.
She's a beautiful woman. She was a fighter. She
Mm-hmm.
strongest Christian I know. My faith is solely because of her. And so I want her to be remembered. But like, it's really interesting to walk around and be like, she was so great. I miss her so much. I had no idea who she was. I have no memories of her.
Yeah. Yeah. And people don't get it either, because they don't have the same experiences.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that really kind of led me to just be a huge advocate of grief and loss, and just having compassion for, there is no time frame, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no time frame to dictate how long you can miss someone and
Mm-hmm.
to hurt over losing them, and to talk about it. Why aren't we talking about the people we love so much, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we all running around avoiding everything, creating all the junk. I'm right there with everybody, right? Like, insert any of it, you know, any of the things that we're doing to avoid pain, and then we're just creating more pain.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, but I guess as I say that, you know, it's also too, I just went through this whole thing of like, there are the steps. I didn't know to think those things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so,
yeah. And everyone handles things differently, but an avoidance and distractions is a way, I'm sure, of handling it in its own way, right? When something happens.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That triggered, I remember the rest of my thought.
There you go.
The attachment and the trauma stuff. So I was talking about that, and just really the time frame that she, you know, passed away, just, it's created some stuff for me. And I'm like, I want to give specifics, but I also don't want to indicate that this means that anybody has any whatever. You know, I like to be an affectionate person. Being an affectionate person is hard for me. I didn't get a lot of that. Mm-hmm. You know, the primary person who gave that to me disappeared. So stuff like that, you know, it's just more, I want to mention that for awareness for people. I don't want to say that like people who are not affectionate have issues. That's not what I mean. Mm-hmm. There's a disconnect from what happens inside of me and what I want to express, and how comfortable I feel in expressing that. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So I was able to heal a lot of that in my group. Mm-hmm. You know, writing that paper and identifying that, and then meeting such beautiful people. You know, the whole wounded warrior concept, that we've all been through something, and that's what leads us to want to advocate for that, and to be brave, and to end the silence about those things. So, excuse me. So I guess in a really long-winded nutshell, that's my story. You know, I lost, you know, somebody very significant, really young. And it's just so interesting that there's this idea that we don't grieve unless we're demanding the attention of it. Mm-hmm. Or that unless there's resulting problems from it, you know. Mm-hmm. And so I've just kind of pinged around in a lot of ways that make a
That's okay.
Not back there. Yeah. In a lot of ways that have made sense. And I feel actually really blessed to be able to advocate in this way. I don't know what the future is necessarily, but to be able to tap into the creative side of myself that was horrifyingly scary, honestly. Mm-hmm.
What was it like to come? Yeah, I was going to say, what was it like to come to terms with writing that thesis? Like, what was that process for you? How did you change throughout that, right? That must have been, I mean, all your life you've had this, right?
You did ask that. I guess I didn't answer that, did I? How have I changed? I apologize.
No, that's okay.
I give myself a lot more grace, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the changes that I've made they don't come naturally per se. I'm much more willing to seek joy. Like I'm very much a glass half empty kind of girl. Like that I just am. And that doesn't mean that I've given up hope or that I don't, you know, like I'm looking at this, if you could see,
Okay.
gallery wall of like all this stuff, of all these like positive things. And so it's kind of funny. I look at that, I'm like, it's sort of like I always knew that I got unplugged there, that I would need that extra boost. If you will. And so now I'm much more willing to say, like, if I would get into my whatever, like I'm very joyful and I'm also very angry. I'm the extremes. And before I would just stay rooted in that. I would be so stubborn and no, I have a right to be upset. I have a right to be angry. I have a right to feel whatever. Yeah, we all do. Not minimizing that in any way. But consciously choosing that bitterness really is hurt more. You know, so now I'm much more willing to just stop and try and reset. That's sort of how I describe myself. If I get triggered, if I get anxious, or if I flip out, whatever, I just try and really reset, pull back, give myself some grace, recognize why I've been triggered, right? You know, mornings are hard for me. Have I eaten? Have I drinking water? Just really recognizing the basic survival stuff. And trying to take better care of myself. Like before, I would just, like I said about the work, I would just grind. Don't eat, don't drink, don't whatever, just work, achieve. And so that's a big change. You know, I'm working from home now. My focus is much more my family. Right after I was laid off, we actually bought our first home. So we moved and our dog had back surgery and it was a whole host of stuff. So it ended up being necessary for me to be home. And so my focus is really, I'm trying to really shift from doing and just being. Trying to understand what joy means and
yeah. So you're married now.
I am.
Yes. And you have 2 children. Was that correct?
No, actually, we don't have any kids.
Oh, okay. So Dory, that must be thinking of someone else. Yeah. What's it like?
I have nieces and nephews.
Oh, yes.
Kiddos. Yeah.
Yeah. What was it like opening up to someone like your husband and letting them in now after feeling everything you felt?
You know, that was I was thinking about that last night. In the sense of, you know, when I describe the attachment stuff and I'm like, but I haven't necessarily had relationship issues. And I'm thinking of a specific story. The point is early on when we were dating, you know, I was 20 to 23 and he's older. So he was 30 when we met. And I was very staunchly for a long time convinced that I didn't want kids. I don't like kids. I don't want kids. When ultimately the very short answer is kids make me uncomfortable.
Okay. That's a lot for you to admit. That's not a lot of women can say that.
I know. And it messes with me, right? Like there's so much that could be healed, right, in having children, probably, and yet I don't want that to be the expectation. It's not the and ultimately a lot of that has shifted. The point is, when we had met, I was like, I don't want kids, no kids, no kids. And he shows up at lunch one day and he's like, so we've got to talk. And this was early on, and again, I was still in college and used to all the just the young guys, that's not on their mind, right? That's just the last thing. And he says, I really like you and I really sort of see a future with you. And you've mentioned a lot of times that you don't want kids and I want kids. And I was like, oh, what, just, wow, life, you know? And we had a really fantastic conversation. And I had sort of this awareness, at least at the time, to be like, to be honest, that was my defense mechanism, and that actually do like kids, it's that I don't know how to act around them, right? Like, I never was a kid, right? Like, I didn't get that opportunity. I had to grow up really dang fast. And so again, this is all awareness that I've developed now, and I have a lot more flexibility and grace about that. And so it was tremendous. It was a huge that conversation was a huge building block of our relationship. And really revealing my ability to take responsibility for the things that I was just saying, not just because, but to really figure out if that's how I felt. That I really believe those things, right? And so we're very much on the same page about children. There are no babies coming now. But that was tremendous. And I think that opened up a huge door of trust. Like, we've had a whole bunch of stuff, don't get me wrong. Relationships are hard, and marriage is so hard. And especially, I think, I really believe that you get paired with people to help you heal your stuff. If you're in a place in life to get to that, I don't know that that's always, that opportunity always presents itself, but it has for us, and I'm really grateful. And so it was tremendously hard. I had only had one serious relationship before him, and it was positive, but it had ended because I really had recognized that I had too much for him to carry. Right? But then I guess it was this idea that I wanted him to carry it, now that I say that out loud. So it continues to be really hard. Grad school helped. Like, it really changed so much. And just recognizing when I'm caught in my own trap. So I think I answered your question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So now, are you full-time doing the jewelry thing, or are you? Yeah. So how did that come about? Like, what made you do the grief and the tokens and that kind of thing? How did that start?
It literally sort of evolved on its own, because so I had mentioned right at the beginning that I had done another podcast, even just last year, and in hindsight, I wasn't even focusing on the remembrance or the grief aspect of it yet. It was sort of God just threading it all together. I think, I had the communication that I was going to be laid off. So that's what was helpful. So when I had mentioned that I was on Instagram and I had connected with that jewelry designer, that was what got me back into really the craft, if you will. And so then it felt like, okay, well, I don't know what's going to happen after I'm laid off. This is something that I can fall back on in the segue, right? And so I got a shop up and really was just so excited to be creative and making jewelry, and to feel like, there was an answer for the transition, right? And so then layoff, we move, the dog, I'm at home, and it was like, thank goodness. And that was a hard time, it was a huge adjustment, if you will. Like, one day I woke up and I didn't have a job. I didn't have any coworkers. My dog couldn't walk. I lived in a different town.
Oh my gosh.
Kind of, and so it was like, it was a really hard time that made me nostalgic, I think, not nostalgic, but I had time to process all that I had just done with my, grad school and my thesis. And to really think about what's important to me. If I'm not a therapist, if I'm not going to move in that direction, what, and I'm not going to be in mental health, what's happening, right? And so, like, in the beginning, if you go look at, sort of like the older pieces of my shop, or like scroll to the beginning of my Instagram, or even listen to that old podcast, it's just like, it was kind of just like throwing darts at the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And then I actually worked with Danielle from the Merriweather Council. So was that just last Christmas? Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so that was just last fall. In terms of branding and really just building, your handmade, not just building, in terms of building your handmade brand. And I really knuckled down in terms of, no, I don't just make jewelry. What do I believe? What am I doing here? And it all just sort of came together, and it continues to evolve. But just learning or recognizing the things that had helped me in the past, the dragonfly is my family's remembrance symbol for my mom. And sparing you a really long story, they're just always around. I mean, obnoxiously always around. It's kind of, I don't mean that, in a bad way, but just it's like a joke in the sense that just like that timing, there they are, you can almost summon them, and really just recognizing that they're with us as much as we can be, I consider myself much more spiritual than religious. I do believe in God and very strong in my faith, but there's something beyond here. There's something beyond here that makes a lot of sense. And I don't know what it is yet, but I feel like there's always those reminders, when we just take just slow down and get out of our head enough to just really feel it. It's there.
Yeah.
So it just step by step, I wish I had sort of a more linear answer, but it just sort of revealed itself, this was what's important to me. I finally recognized that I could be the one to talk about it. You know what I mean? Like that was sort of the first layer in the sense of when I wrote my paper, why aren't we talking about children? It evolved to especially children who are adopted. And I'm in no way indicating that that everybody who's been adopted has felt that way. But I know that there's people who have. We're not talking about it, right? And I know there's tons of reasons why. That's merely an example. Again, I don't want to put anybody off as using that example, but just more of it's happening a lot.
Yeah,
it's
and we're not talking about it.
People are being adopted every day as an example. Again, and maybe I'm using that example because I'm shying away from using my own. People are killed in traumatic ways every day. And and we don't talk about it. Like it's all over the news and we watch it all on shows, and yet it's happening actually. Where you live, it's happening pretty commonly. And that's something that we're not talking about, and the layers that losing somebody in a traumatic way, what that adds, and so it just, I finally realized that I could be somebody, right? That whole, what's that quote? Finally realized that somebody was me or whatever. So,
yeah. What do you think is next for you? Do you have any?
Continuing to build the business, it's still in my brain. I'm pinging around a little bit in the sense of, in a lot of it, I just continuing to build my business and to serve and encourage people and advocate for grief support in the best way that I can. But to bring a focus, more of an ownership to everything. I have my shop on Etsy, which I love, but building out my own website and continuing to make this mine, connecting with more people who want to talk about the people that they love. This isn't about walking out in the world and saying, I've been through this tragic thing, yay me, this is so important. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that don't let people tell you how to grieve. don't feel badly when you feel like you don't fit into all the phases that they talk about.
Mm-hmm.
You're not a burden, for hurting and for wanting to talk about the people that you love,
Mm-hmm.
wanting to understand why they're not here. And the joy really actually is a joy in the midst of all that. And for me to say that, for me, like queen of pessimism, queen of sarcasm, glass is always half empty, joy is still possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I really believe that healing is a lifelong process. But the healing that I found to now has certainly come from the struggles and the fire and the ashes and all that pain. Like that has served something. But there's been a lot of healing in choosing to believe that I deserve to be joyful too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I always ask a series of kind of quicker questions at the end. But before I do that, I want to ask, what's your meaning of joy today?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Right. Like I don't want to just replace it with another word.
Yeah. And I'm sure it's changing and evolving as you go, right? But
just not giving up.
Yeah.
Like literally, there's going to be days where joy is just like the last damn choice you want. Sort of what I was talking about, that bitterness, that stubborn, just like, no.
Mm-hmm.
And not giving up in pursuit of it.
I like that.
Just the belief that it exists. I think the belief that it's not about everything around you, right? It really is just keeping that faith, not giving up. This is all worth it.
Mm-hmm.
That is what gives me joy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like in hindsight of just like, I never gave up. I was angry and I was a lot of things. But I always knew that there was a reason not to give up. And I think that's joy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I like that answer.
Thank you.
What's your definition of perfectly imperfect?
Oh, I loved this one.
Yeah.
Kind of ran around with it for a few minutes.
Mm-hmm.
But now I got to make sure I get it right. So where's my notes?
No, that's okay.
And this is sort of what I was saying a minute ago, that I don't want to just replace it, with another word, but it reminds me of grace. Really embracing your imperfections and knowing that that's what makes you who you are. You're better because of them. You're stronger because of them. It's really not about how you feel, honestly. And that's not to minimize your feelings in any way. They're incredibly important. They serve a strong function, a really important function, but all the things we could talk ourselves out of based upon the way we feel, you know what I mean? And so I really just think it's trying to accept those imperfections and say, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This is going to speak to somebody anyway. This is going to reach the person that it needs to reach. It will be perfect as imperfect as it is. So I love that. Yeah.
What's your definition of powerfully passionate?
Beauty from ashes, really taking that struggle, the things that, all those imperfections, all that pain, all that grief, and finding a way to advocate for what you believe in, advocate for yourself, advocate for others. Being more powerful because of, and passionate because of what you've been through, finding that glass half full side, right?
Yeah.
But just really placing your faith in the fact that it's not all for naught. And, you know, I say all that, and I had this strong memory. I remember saying to my aunt once, one of my mom's sisters, you know, when the start, you know, the concept of the remembrance jewelry, it's certainly in honor of my mom. It's evolved more, I think, you know, in the sense that I'm doing it for me and I'm doing it for others. She certainly was the catalyst, but I think it began because I really wanted to try and redeem that loss. And that was it feels beautiful to say. It's a huge responsibility to try and live out. Like, it's just not possible necessarily. I don't want to say it's not possible, but I don't want that to be my expectation, right? Like, that's intense. And so I remember my aunt saying it might not be redeemed on this side of heaven. And it was like,
Wow.
Right? Like, it was super intense, super honest, and I didn't like it, and yet it gave me peace. It will not be for naught. It just not, we might not.
Well, you may not know it as it is right now, right?
Yeah.
In your life,
and maybe not in this life, you know, but I believe that sort of all that spiritual stuff I was talking about, you know, when that dragonfly comes and lands right when you're talking about all the things, it's just like, but it's okay.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's not to minimize in any way, shape, or form. It's not okay every day. Things are not okay. Excuse me. And yet they are. So.
Cool. So I have 2 more questions to ask you. With one of them being, what's the best way for women to find you online, find your store, see all your beautiful jewelry that you do? Yeah.
So my shop is actually on Etsy right now. However, I do have my own website that links to it. So thejoyfuljewelrybox.com. You can always reach me there. You can message me through there. And email is always great to reach me direct. But if you want to see what I'm doing and follow along with what's happening, I'm all over Instagram all the time. Love Instagram. And then I'm trying to be a lot more mindful with Facebook and posting a lot of articles over there and whatnot, and creating a better system to not be everywhere, but to be in more places. You know, Instagram started to feel limiting in some of the content that I wanted to share. So email, Instagram, Facebook for articles. So
cool. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. And we'll have that all linked up for all the listeners and everything for them to find you. So yeah. And then the last question I have is to finish off. What's one piece of advice or what you would want Earth Girls or anyone else who's struggling through something and want to turn it into their strength? What's your takeaway from your story?
Don't ever give up. You know, that feels so trite to say. It really does. But I think on even those days where you're just like, you're not getting out of bed, you are bitter, you are stubborn, like there is no quote that's going to help today. Don't give up. Something will come from what you're dealing with. Don't let people dictate your grief. But having said that, you know who your people are, right? Like, I feel like when I say that, you know, certainly the help of others is tremendous too. Like, there's people who will come by with a coffee and say, let's go for a walk. And, you know your people. Know the people that when they say things to you, they're speaking your truth, right? So don't let people dictate your grief, but be open to help. Let people who really are there for you show up. I was never really good at that. Ever really good at that. And so I think that's just tapping into that intuition in the sense of don't let people run your story, but let people help you too. Right. And tap into that intuition in the sense of the biggest lesson I learned into going to that bad therapist was get the right help. Get the right help. When you have a door slammed in your face, don't give up. Right. Like, I should have gone back and said, no, I understand I only get 10 sessions, but wait a minute. No. You know, you just took somebody who was incredibly vulnerable and essentially you're susceptible to a lot of other things. You guys are really, it's counterproductive. And so I get the right help. And if you don't know where that is, call a hotline. call a hotline and explain that you're not getting the help you need, but just, there is always somebody. You just have to keep trying. And it's really hard sometimes, you know, and that's why it's just like, you can't give up. Maybe it's not going to be today. It might not be this week, but just don't give up. And I'd say the last thing is that choosing to be joyful really just doesn't minimize what you've been through. It doesn't minimize the memory of who you've lost. I think it honors them all the more. Your joy doesn't minimize the struggles that you've been through. It doesn't negate it. I think you can tell your story even more powerfully within it. So,
yeah. And you're allowed to be joyful and happy, right? Even, I mean, because of what you've been through, and not just in spite of it too.
Well, and that's sort of the thing, you know, if it's really this idea of being content no matter what, that it's a choice. And again, it's a really hard choice.
It's hard.
Most of the time, you know, again, I feel like sometimes when I say that, I sound really trite, like this Pollyanna, and I'm like, it's a joke kind of with my friends that I would be this pioneer and I'm an advocate for joy. It's the hardest choice you will make most of the time, but it's so worth it. So worth it. And it will, things, they might not, in fact, they might make less sense, but they'll be a little bit lighter.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's also too this idea of, if we're to be content in all circumstances, if that's joy, why would that exist if that wasn't to be felt? Right? Like, I don't necessarily believe that the point of life is to be happy. I don't really believe that at all. But I believe it's the lesson in really choosing to have that faith, right? That this pain will serve something, and that it doesn't impede my joy, that I won't let it steal my joy, that I can actually still be triumphant regardless of what I've been through, you know? So.
Well, thank you. I want to take a second and thank you, Lindsay, for struggling all through your life and not being joyful through everything, but fighting to find the joy and being open to improving and open to the possibility that you are allowed to feel what you can feel and to turn it into something else, and to be an advocate and to be a pioneer, I believe, for who you are. And your jewelry is beautiful, and I love the message behind it. So thank you for all you do and for sharing your story.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you for the work that you're doing and the stories that you're telling. And I love the holistic approach. That's not the word I'm looking for, but whole life approach. You know what I mean? That you're telling stories from all angles, from all backgrounds. And I just think it's really valuable. And I appreciate that you're building a community that talks about the stuff we're not talking about.
Well, I know what it feels like to feel alone and to struggle through it on your own, right? So, and there's so many parallels that you can draw from all the different stories women go through. So there's so much there. Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And we'll catch you on the flip side.
Yeah.